Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for making your way back to our class. We appreciate your presence of everybody here. We're in the midst of a study of Aaron, a faithful man who served in the shadow of Moses. So before we get started, let's begin with a word of prayer, if you would bow with me. Our good Father in heaven, we are so grateful to Thee for your watch care over us. We're grateful, Father, for this opportunity that we have tonight, in the middle of the week, that we can be together with our church family. We're so grateful for this chance, all the blessings you give to us, and one of those blessings is to give us examples from the Old Testament of men who were very faithful servants. We pray that we will learn some lessons from them tonight. Be with us as we engage in the study. This I pray in Christ's name. Amen. All right, just a real quick review. Now, over hundreds of years, the descendants of Jacob and his 12 sons, they've been living in slavery in the land of Egypt. They were slaves to Pharaoh as well as the Egyptian people. And for generations, the people would cry out to the Lord, please save us, deliver us from these oppressors. And God took notice, and he chose Moses to step into the spotlight. And Moses was commissioned to lead the people out of Egypt. He was to lead them to the land that God had promised to Abraham, as well as to his descendants that they would live in. And God also called Aaron. Aaron was to be Moses' prophet, to speak on Moses' behalf, to be Moses' wingman, and to provide support and encouragement to Moses as they performed their mission. Now, Moses was a leader, and he was the one in the spotlight, and Aaron had a supporting role. He was faithfully serving in Moses' shadow. Now, after a little bit of persuasion, Pharaoh finally relented, but it was God's plan to teach Pharaoh one final great lesson. So God parted the waters of the Red Sea, and his people crossed over on dry land. But when Pharaoh's army tried to follow them, the waters came crushing back on the army, and it completely destroyed all of them. So now, without any more threat from the Egyptians, the people thought that they were safely on their way to the Promised Land. This was the land that God had described as a good and spacious land, a land that was flowing with milk and honey. So the people were excited, and they were very happy. They were on their way finally. But the Lord led the people in the opposite direction of Canaan land. And when they ran out of food and water, they started to grumble. They started complaining. Those happy feelings quickly disappeared. And that began a pattern of grumbling and moaning and complaining, mostly directed at Moses. Moses would ask God for guidance, and God would step in and provide food and water. But the people were stubborn, and they were impatient, and they started grumbling just again. So this pattern would last until they came to Mount Sinai, where the grumbling would be replaced by terror and fear. See, God had come down to the top of the mountain, and the mountain shook, and there was lightning, and there was fire, and clouds, and lots of smoke. And there was also a very loud trumpet sound throughout the whole time. And from the top of the mountain, God spoke the 10 Commandments to the people. And the people were very frightened by all of this. So while the people were set up encamped at the base of Mount Sinai, Moses, he would make many trips up and down the mountain to talk with God. And one of those times, Moses was gone for 40 days and for 40 nights. So in our last class, we looked at the unfortunate incident of the golden calf, which was facilitated by Aaron. You see, the people went off the rails, and God was not pleased with their disobedience. And one of the consequences was that 3,000 people were immediately killed, and a plague of sickness killed even more than that a little later. So this all got the people's attention, and their disposition changed from a one of fear to a one of, okay, we get it, no more misbehaving, we'll just calmly wait and see what happens next. So what happens next is that the people of Israel, they will remain encamped at the base of Mount Sinai for over a year. Now, while they were there, the Lord provides Moses with many rules and regulations for his people. And they will become known as the Law of Moses, and later on as just simply the Law. Now, the nation of Israel was to be a theocracy under the direct control of God himself. Now, here's some fun facts about that law. It was comprised of 613 commandments. And it includes both positive commandments, as in, you shall do this, as well as negative commandments, i.e. things you can't do, you must not do. Now, the best known of these commandments, of course, were the 10 commandments. Now, 8 of the 10 were thou shalt not negative commandments, and 2 of them were positive commandments. Remember those 2?
Worship only God.
No, that's thou shalt not worship. That's a negative. Honor your father and mother, and remember the Sabbath day. Okay, good. Very good. Excellent. So now there were many religious and ceremonial laws. There were laws against idolatry and paganism and against blasphemy. There were laws requiring tithing and laws about observing the Sabbath day. And there were special feasts to be observed. And they included special sacrifices and offerings. And the law included special rules for all of the priests. Now, many laws can be classified as health and dietary laws, such as, avoid unclean things. Now, what are some of those unclean things that they were supposed to avoid? Can you give me some of the examples of that?
No pigs.
Pork.
No pork.
Okay, certain foods were unclean. Okay.
And certain times they weren't allowed to touch. They had to be clean themselves before they could touch whatever.
Okay. What else? Dead bodies. Okay, any kind of dead body, touching that would make them unclean. Okay, what else? Certain animals, blood, people suffering from leprosy, things like that were all part of the law of Moses. Now, this law prescribed consequences when these laws were prohibited or broken. Laws that are broken would make you considered to be unclean. And the law also gave remedies to regain the status of being clean again. Now, many of these health laws were intended to promote the holiness of the people. And then there were governmental and civil laws. The law of Moses established courts, and it established punishments for lawbreakers. And some violations of the law it carried the death penalty. Anybody remember some of those?
Disobedient children. Disobedient children.
Disobedient children. Okay, you're cursing at your parents, or cursing your parents was one law that demanded the death penalty. What else? I'll give you one. Murder. Okay, what else? Adultery. Blasphemy. Good, yeah. Idolatry. Okay, those are all good examples of that. And civil laws were established. They had laws concerning marriage and divorce and remarriage. There were laws concerning masters and servants and the relationship that they had with each other. There were laws concerning contracts and agreements, property ownership, and inheritance. And there were many laws that were designed to protect the weak of the society. Now, all of these laws here were intended to maintain a social order and also to maintain religious purity. Now, God also gave Moses lengthy instructions for the design and the construction of a place of worship. And this place of worship was called a tabernacle, or a tent of meeting. And this tabernacle was a symbol of God's holy presence among his people. And it was constructed in such a way where it was mobile, in that it was designed so it could be dismantled and moved to a new location and then reassembled in the same way, exactly the same way it was before. It was to be moved along with the Israelites as they moved around and migrated throughout the region. Now, the temple, this tabernacle, was made from common materials that were found nearby, like some of the wood, copper, and the tin in the neighborhood. It also contained precious metals like silver and gold. Now, all of the materials used to make up these structures, was voluntarily given by the people. So take a look at this picture here. The tabernacle itself consisted of three main areas, three unique areas. There was the outer court there, and there was two enclosed rooms, the holy place and the most holy place. Now, the outer court was screened off by curtains. They were made out of linen, and they were 7.5 feet high. And the screened off area was 150 feet long by 75 feet wide. So if you've ever been to the Siedenstrang's house, that's about the size of our lot. So if you come over, next time you come over, stand in the corner and look across, and that's really the size of the area that was curtained off here. So as you enter the court, the first thing that you would encounter would be the altar of burnt offerings. Okay, this was placed closest to the gate. You can't see the gate; it got cut off by the picture. It was placed closest to the gate as a reminder that no one could approach to God, no one could be approaching God except by the place of sacrifice. And this altar of burnt offerings was a hollow wooden frame. It was overlaid with brass. It was exactly 7 feet by 7 feet. It was 4.5 feet tall. About like that. Okay. It also had had horns. You can barely see the horns on each of the posts there, each of the 4 corners, and that was also overlaid with bronze. And the horns were used to bind the animals that were going to be sacrificed. And the fire on the altar was to be kept burning continuously. And it symbolized the perpetual worship and dedication to God. Go past the altar of burnt offerings and you get to the laver. There's a brass basin. So this contained water for the priests to wash their hands and feet before they entered the tented area. Washing hands and feet, cleaning up was not an option. Failure to wash at the laver prior to entering the tented area had a death penalty. Everybody had to automatically be killed from that. So this was to be a reminder of the need for cleanliness and obedience before undertaking any task for God. This whole thing is just full of symbolism. Intentional. So the next was the tent of meeting. And this is how God wanted it made. Now the inner walls were made of curtains that, when assembled, were 45 feet long, 15 feet wide, and 15 feet tall. And these inner curtains were completely protected from the sun and the rain. The 11 curtains of goat hair was used as a tent over these inner curtains. Now on top of that was another tent made out of ram skins that had been dyed red. And over that canvas was another canvas that was made from the hides of sea cows, kind of like our manatees. So the inner wall curtains and everything inside those rooms, they were safe, completely safe from the sun and from any rain. Now the inner 2 rooms, the covered area consisted of 2 rooms, the holy place and the most holy place, also known as the Holy of Holies. And these rooms were separated from each other by a veil from blue, purple, and scarlet yarn using finely twisted linen and threads. Now within the first area there, the holy place, you could find 3 different things there. First there was a table of showbread, then the golden lampstand, and the altar of incense. We'll talk about more about these in just a little later on. And the second place is called the most holy place. That's where the Ark of the Covenant was located and kept. The ark was made of acacia wood, but it was inlaid inside and out with gold. And it had rings attached to it so that the poles could be inserted to carry the ark around. See, no one was allowed to touch the ark. And the Ark of the Covenant was called the mercy seat. And 2 cherubim were also made of gold. They were placed at the ends of the mercy seat. Anybody remember what was kept inside the ark?
10 Commandments.
Aaron's rod, manna,
Tablet.
and the tablets. Okay, the two tablets, the 2 stone tablets. Okay, this entire structure was called the tabernacle, and it was intended only to be tended. It was tended only by the priests who were from the tribe of Levi. Now, in our last class, we noted that Aaron's golden calf incident, his failure there, wasn't the end of his story. So we noted that God will forgive anybody, no matter what the sin. That's the nature of God. So God wasn't through with Aaron. Okay, Aaron still had a very important role to play in God's plan for his people. That role was to be the high priest of the nation of Israel. So, as God's chosen high priest, God wanted Aaron to be set above everyone else. Now, throughout time, even in today's world, one thing that we can use to distinguish the status of an individual is to see what he's wearing, right? So kings and queens, they enjoy the finest clothing that's available out there, while some poor people, they generally just get by wearing rags that just barely cover their body. So you can look at King Charles today, and you can easily see that by the way that he is dressed, that he is not like everybody else. Agree with that? Likewise, you can look at a person standing outside a hut in Eastern Africa and conclude that that man is not a member of the royal family. So many times, uniforms are worn purposely to separate classes of people. So do we have anybody here who's ever served in the military? Anybody know anything at all about the military? All right, let's say we do. All right. So in the military, you'll find a whole bunch of enlisted men, and you have a few of the higher ranking officers. So how do you tell them apart?
The uniform stripes on their uniforms.
The stripes on their uniforms, and sometimes it's more than stripes, it's gold eagles and bars and stars. Okay, very good. And the enlisted men don't wear those type of things. So that's one way you can tell them apart. Okay, so as the man that God chose to be Israel's first high priest, God wanted Aaron to be set apart from everybody else. So God wanted Aaron to be dressed in clothes that expressed both glory as well as beauty. And God told Moses to have special, unique clothes made specifically for Aaron. And these clothes were going to be used strictly by the high priest. And these clothes would be made out of only the best material crafted by the best people, workers in the land. You had the best weavers. They were using the best fibers to make the best linen that there was. There were no flaws allowed in the product when they were done with it. They had the best tailors using the best threads available to stitch these things together. You had the best goldsmiths in the whole land using the purest of gold for parts of this uniform. And you had the best jewelers in the land. And they also collected and used only the best jewels, the best stones that were in the land. And these people together worked on these uniforms, but they weren't just winging it, they weren't just creating stuff on their own. They were following carefully the pattern that God had given to them. So they're following the pattern exactly. So let's take a look at that clothing. All right, starting at the top, we have a turban. The turban was made of fine linen. And attached to the front of that turban was a gold plate, also known as a diadem. So sometimes we sing the song, "All hail the name of, all hail the power of Jesus' name." And one of the lines is, "Bring forth the royal diadem and crown him Lord of all." So next time we sing that song, you'll say, "Hey, I know what a diadem is." Okay, it was a gold plate used at the top, attached to the turban of the high priest. Now, on this diadem, on this gold plate, there were the words "Holy to the Lord" inscribed on it. And this signified the high priest's special role or consecration. And the gold plate was held onto the turban with a blue cord across the top, just like this picture shows. So next is the garment itself. What you can't see in this picture is the linen drawers that were to be worn. Not just by the high priest, but by every priest who was working inside the tabernacle. And these would be similar to today's men's boxer shorts. And they were required to be worn to ensure that there was modesty as the men tended to their work there. The next layer was a full-length tunic, okay, and only the finest of checkered linen, perfectly stitched together by the tailors, was used here. And over the tunic was worn a robe. It was blue, and it featured a hem at the bottom that had gold bells attached to it. So the bells would ring whenever Aaron moved around. And this especially came useful when he went behind the curtains in the most holy place and the holy place to make sure that people knew that he was still around. And over the robe was an ephod. Now to me, this kind of represents an apron of sorts. It was made with finely embroidered gold blue, and purple linen. And on that ephod at the top were a couple of shoulder pieces made out of onyx stones. And each stones were engraved with the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. 6 names on each stone. Attached to this was the breastpiece of judgment. Okay, it was also made of very finely embroidered materials. It was 9 inches by 18 inches, folded in 2 to form a pouch or storage pouch or pocket behind it. And this pouch was used to store to hold the Urim and the Thummim. We're going to talk a little more about those in a little bit. Now, attached to this breastpiece were 12 stones, and each stone represented one of the 12 tribes. So it was 4 rows of 3. So this was a one-of-a-kind garment made according to the detailed instructions that were given to Moses by God. And this whole uniform, it symbolized Aaron's holiness as well as the sacred duties that were to be performed by the high priest. So let's talk a little bit about those duties. So being the high priest involved more than having the title and wearing the uniform. Being the high priest involved, it was a position of great authority and great responsibility. The job was to be the spiritual leader and the mediator between God and the people. The role of the high priest had very specific duties that God had required to be done. Now, many of these duties of the high priest could be delegated. For example, like keeping the fire going at the altar of burnt offerings that was located in the outer of the court, that could be delegated to someone else. But there's some duties that only the high priest was allowed to do. So altogether, the high priest's job was a true 24/7 full-time job. So let's look at some of those duties. There are some things that had to be done every single day. Things that had to be done each day, they included overseeing the operations of the tabernacle. So this involved the cleaning and the maintenance of the outer court, as well as the altars, the altar of burnt offering, as well as the altar of burnt incense inside the holy place. Also, duty was also to tend to the various objects used in the worship, it's like the showbread table and the lampstand. Now, the 7 branches of the lampstand of the menorah, they had to be kept burning continuously throughout the whole night, beginning at evening until morning. And the lampstand symbolized God's eternal presence with the people. And God gave specific instructions that this job of lighting and keeping the lamps lit was to be done by Aaron and his 4 sons. Now, the high priest was responsible for the overseeing of the daily offering of the incense of the golden altar, which was in the holy place. So the burning of the incense represented the prayers that were ascending up to the Lord. And in the morning, when the lampstand was attended to, the incense was burned. And then in the evening, when the lamps were lit at twilight, more incense was to be burned. And only a very specific incense was allowed to be burned. Okay, the only exception to this was on the Day of Atonement. We're going to talk a little bit about that in just a second. So nothing else, no other incense, except for the special stuff, to be offered on this golden altar of incense. And we know this to be true because Aaron's 2 oldest sons, Nadab and Abihu, they offered unauthorized fire to the Lord, contrary to the Lord's specific instructions. And God sent a consuming fire upon them, and they died. So there's many lessons that can be learned from this incident. But since we're looking at Aaron's story, just suffice it to say that losing 2 sons abruptly had to have been a great blow to Aaron. So he is left with 2 remaining sons. Their names are Eleazar and Ithamar, 2 remaining sons to share the load. Now Aaron was always on call. The law of Moses was new to everyone. So the high priest would be the one to teach the people its applications. So the high priest was also to be the final judge when specific questions came up about the law. And all of this teaching and judging required an ongoing studying of the laws, along with much meditation and much reflection. And Aaron would often speak to the Lord, asking for guidance of the many hard things that were brought to him. Now we mentioned the Urim and the Thummim before. They were to be kept in the breastpiece worn by the high priest. And their primary purpose was to provide answers from the Lord. So when the high priest sought some divine guidance about something, he would use these objects to receive a response. We're not told exactly how that worked. It could be like casting lots. It could be as simple as flipping a coin. We just don't know. But as the high priest, it was Aaron's job to use this Urim and Thummim when it was needed. Now the law designed several times each year for special memorials and special celebrations. For example, like Passover was one of those. So let's take a look at, but the most important ritual of all, special day of all, was the Day of Atonement. And that's when the whole high priest, he performed very elaborate and detailed purification rituals. So let's take a look at those rituals. Now the Day of Atonement took place on the 10th day of the 7th month of each year. So that would be around September and October on our calendar. It was to be a day when nobody did any work and everybody was supposed to fast for 24 hours. But for Aaron and for subsequent high priests, preparations for this day began 7 days earlier. For Aaron, the Day of Atonement would begin. It would start 7 days earlier because he would have to be separated from his household to make sure that he was ritually pure. When anything going to happen to endanger his ritual purity. Now, on the Day of Atonement, it would begin with Aaron's day would begin with the usual morning offerings. And after that was done, there would be a thorough bathing with water before he got dressed. There were special clothes that would be used that were different from the regular high priest clothes, but they're special clothes that he had to wear that day, and they were considered sacred. And putting these sacred clothes on a dirty body was certainly a no-no. After bathing, he put on his linen underwear and then a sacred white tunic. The satin lash, or a linen sash, was put on it, and a linen turban would then be put on his head. And again, these garments were not the same ones that he used when he was dressed up as a high priest. So Aaron would then enter the courtyard of the tabernacle, and he would take with him a bull calf and 2 goats. He would first lay his hands on the calf, and he would confess his sins to the Lord. So, as a side note, do you suppose when he was laying his hands on a calf, and not a lamb or a goat or some other animal, but a calf, do you think that reminded Aaron of anything? Yeah, perhaps it called to memory of the golden calf incident. So Aaron confesses his sins to the Lord. And after this confession, the calf is then slaughtered. And Aaron would collect blood from the calf. The calf is a sin offering to atone for the sins of Aaron as well as for his whole household. The 2 goats would be taken up to the holy place, and they would be presented to the Lord. The 1 goat would be for the Lord to be sacrificed immediately, and the other goat would be considered to be the scapegoat, which is going to be sent into the wilderness. Aaron would cast lots to determine which goat was which. So the goat that was selected for the Lord was then slaughtered, and blood from that goat was collected by Aaron. And this goat sacrifice represented a sin offering for all the people of Israel. Now throughout the day, Aaron, the high priest, would enter the most holy place multiple times. He'd be in and out of the most holy place many times. And he would take burning coals from the altar, and he had 2 handfuls of finely ground up incense. And this was going to create a cloud of incense within the most holy place, a cloud that was big enough to cover up the Ark of the Covenant. When that happened, Aaron would then take the blood from the sacrificed calf and sprinkle it onto the ark on the mercy seat. And he'd do the same thing with the blood from the goat that had been sacrificed. Then he would take the 2 different bloods, and mix them together, and he would sprinkle it onto the two altars, the altar of burnt offering and the altar of incense. And this represented the cleansing of the tabernacle from the impurities of the Israelites. Then the high priest would lay his hands on the head of the other goat, the live goat, the scapegoat, and he would confess all the sins of all the people of Israel over it. And then this goat would then be sent to the wilderness, symbolically carrying away the sins of the people with it. Now, the bodies of the slain calf and goat, they would be taken outside the whole camp, and they would be burned. They would be burned up there. And when all this was completed, the high priest, Aaron, he took another bath. He changed back into his regular clothes. But his day wasn't over. He would conclude his day with the evening burnt offerings. These burnt offerings were made up of 2 rams, one for himself and then one for all the people. After that, he was done and he went home. So it was a full day's activities, mostly by him. Now, all of these activities were performed with great care and great precision, just as outlined by God. So the high priest, Aaron's careful and solemn observation of these rituals on this holy day of atonement, this provided for the cleansing of everyone's sins before the Lord. The high priest's activities on this day were done to allow for a temporary reconciliation with God. And as the high priest, Aaron had to do this job very carefully, exactly as the God prescribed. And he would do this each day that Day of Atonement came around. And for Aaron, he would do this over the next 40 years. All right, so it's been about a year since the people of Israel have been gone from Egypt. Okay, they've been camping at the base of Mount Sinai for about 11 or 12 months now. The law of Moses had been downloaded and recorded by Moses. The tabernacle had been built, and the priesthood had been established, and Aaron was now serving in the role of the high priest. And the people had been relatively calm. They were trying to get used to these new rules and regulations. And in just a little while, God will lead them away from Mount Sinai. In preparation for the taking of the promised land, God orders He orders a numbering of the people, at least those who are of fighting age, over the age of 20 years or older. And this is more than just a census or a military draft. It will be a national registration from which Jewish people in centuries to come were able to trace their ancestry. Now, this natural registration, the numbering of the people would total over 2+ million people, 2+ million strong. Over 600,000 of these people were men old enough to fight. Now, in this registration, the descendants of Joseph, Ephraim, and Manasseh, they are counted as separate tribes. And the men from the tribe of Levi are not counted among the fighting men, because they're going to be set in charge of the care and the moving of the tabernacle. So, with the completion of the national registration, whenever the Israelites moved and they set up a new camp, each tribe would be assigned a specific area that they were to be located. For instance, the Levites were always set their tents closest to the tabernacle. In fact, under penalty of death, only those people from the tribe of Levi were allowed to get anywhere near the tabernacle. Now Moses and Aaron and their sons, they would set up their tents in front of the tabernacle curtains that faced the east towards the rising sun. Now when the tabernacle was disassembled and moved and then reassembled, it wasn't an everybody grab something that you're close to and get going on it moment. God gave very specific instructions on how everything was to be done. Has anybody ever been down to Sarasota to the Ringling Museum?
Yes.
Isn't that neat? Okay. Has anyone seen the movie The Greatest Show on Earth?
Yes.
Okay, with Jimmy Stewart?
No.
Not the showman, but the Greatest Show on Earth with Jimmy Stewart. Ever seen that movie? All right. What fascinated me most about that movie was the filming of the actual moving of the circus from town to town. Okay, that was real live footage that they showed there. All of it was done with very great precision. All the men had jobs. All the animals had a job to do. It was really a truly amazing sight to see. So I think that moving the tabernacle was kind of similar. It was done in a similar way. So let's see how God dictated, how God directed that the tabernacle be moved. All right, so let me put back this family tree of Levi. We looked at this earlier. So when the tabernacle was disassembled, Aaron and his sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, they would first cover up the Ark of the Covenant, the table of showbread, the lampstand, and the altars. They would cover them up with special coverings. And this was to ensure that none of these items were ever touched or even seen by anybody. So no one was allowed to take a peek at the holy things, not even an accidental glance. So after everything was properly covered, then Aaron and his sons would put the poles in place. Each of these pieces of furniture had little brass rings attached to them so that the poles could be inserted in them and they could be lifted up and moved around without them being touched. Now the Kohathites, they were the people that were responsible for carrying these objects. Only the Kohathites were allowed to do that. Now the Gershonites, they were responsible for the curtains around the courtyard and the tabernacle curtains and the coverings, as well as the ropes that were tied everything together. And the Merarites, they were responsible for the frames and the crossbars of the tabernacle, and all the posts and bases, including the tent pegs and their bases. Okay? And Aaron's youngest son, Ithamar, he was supposed to supervise their work. All in all, there were 8,580 Levites involved with moving the tabernacle.
8,500.
8,580 that were responsible for moving the tabernacle. And each one had his own work assigned to him. Each one was told what to carry. So the disassembling and the moving of the tabernacle, to say the least, was very highly organized and coordinated. Every family of the Levites knew their specific duties. When it was time to move, there was no standing around. There was no waiting for someone to tell them what to do. There was no being in the wrong place or no one getting in the way of someone else. There was no, oops, sorry about that, moments going on at all. So this process, this specific process, allowed for the efficient transportation of the tabernacle whenever the Israelites had to move to a new location. And everybody was on call, ready to set everything up, ready to get to action as soon as the cloud in the sky, whenever it started to moving around. They were ready to go. Okay, they were told, we're going. They didn't know how long they were going to be in one place, but they specifically, very carefully, with precision, took care of their jobs, and everything was done quite in order. And God likes orderly things. We can see that again here. So now, it's been over a year since they were leaving Egypt. The people are finally on their way to the Promised Land. And that's where I'm going to stop there. We've got several minutes to go, so I know this has been a tough lesson. There was a lot of details, and thank you for trying to stay awake as we went through it. Anybody have any questions or comments or questions about this whole process or anything you want to add to it?
What is the difference between that dot and that dot, that space and that space? Unhappy
That's
place.
just supposed to indicate where the people are about the particular time we're talking about. That's just a
And that's, so,
yeah, that general area. Okay.
and that's Gulf of Agaba.
That's part of the Red Sea area. The Gulf of Aqaba. So I kind of I fell in love with these emojis. You see that the last couple of times, and I thought that'd just be a cute way of showing where they were and kind of their disposition. Barbara?
Why, do you have any idea why God didn't just bring them around that way, or did he sort of know their inclinations and this was kind of a test?
I think yes.
All these years?
Yes and yes and yes. I think that's all possibilities. Yeah, because we said earlier classes, if finally out of Egypt, the straightest path was to go across the coast up to the land of Canaan.
Yeah.
But that's not where he went. Okay. First, he had to go down to the Red Sea, and his purpose of that was to teach Pharaoh a big lesson. You know, I'm the Lord. Okay. Watch. You watch and see. Look at the power of the Red Sea parted. You ever been to Niagara Falls? You see the
Yes.
power of the water going. You know, I kind of think of the same kind of effect, except the water setting and parting. Somehow they did it. There's dry land there. Moses and the Israelites passed over, but then when he got across, then the Egyptians thought they could get through it, and they got destroyed. So that was part of God's plan. Okay, so once they got across, then okay, well, we took a little detour. We can see that happened. Now it's time to head to the Promised Land. But God had other things in plan. One of the things was the giving of the law on Mount Sinai. So they had to go down that over the next year. They would make their way down over the next few months. They would make their way down to Mount Sinai there, where all these things happen, teaching us lessons all along the way.
Yeah. But since we know a good part of the story anyhow, even when they're finally going up, it's a long time before they get there.
And we're going to talk about that as well over the next few lessons. We got one more lesson on Aaron, and we're going to have a couple lessons on Caleb. So we'll be talking about their wandering around for 40 years. So, and also we'll have some other things, some other graphics to show you the extent of how big of an area that they had to wander in. Good questions. But those are all good questions. Tim?
It was on Mount Sinai that God originally had called Moses. So it's not, that's probably has something to do with the explanation of why that's where the Israelites went to when they left Egypt.
So that Moses could see his relatives?
I think that's because it was the mountain of God.
Okay.
I don't see the Gershonites, Ophatites, and the Merarites. I don't see where they live.
They were all part of the tribe of Levi, so they would have been living around they would have been around the area of the tabernacle. So they had been closer to the tabernacle. When it was time to move, they were right there.
Okay.
That's why. Carl?
The direct answer to why they had to go down there and all the way around was because God was leading them. It was God's choice. And I really don't think that the scriptures explain why God chose that. But every place they went, it was always with the leadership of God, with the fire at night and the cloud of the day. And they didn't make any decisions, as far as I can tell, themselves where they were going to go.
And we're not told how much warning they had when they're getting ready to move either. Okay, it wasn't okay. Send an email. God would send an email to Moses and say, "Okay, got 2 weeks to get everything ready."
Yeah.
I mean, chances are the cloud just started moving.
Yeah.
And okay, people saw the cloud moving.
It's
Okay,
time
well,
to
that's our sign. We'll get up and start moving. So the people had to be ready and prepared to take apart the tabernacle. So that they
And the direction they went was the direction that the cloud was going.
right.
When you think of a boot camp, you break a person down in a boot camp, and you're going to do it on our terms and our ways. It's going to benefit all of you by doing it the same way and being together and united. And it takes a while to institutionalize that mindset, and possibly by taking that time and slowing it down, rather than a rush to get to where they're going. God is saying, I'm going to make sure that they understand who I am, and their dependence is upon me day after day after day after day, until they finally get it in their thick heads that I am their God and you're going to follow me. And so possibly institutionalizing who I am and your dependence is on me. Just a thought.
Did you ever figure it out?
No, not
I have a
yet.
hard enough time with that in a boot camp. Didn't go I need to be.
Yeah, we
And
did
also, they had to have all the people die so they could start up again.
Yeah, we're going to see that next week. We're going to see that's part of Aaron's story next week. So we got one more lesson of Aaron. Thank you so much. I know this was probably a tougher lesson than most, so I appreciate you hanging with me. Come back on Sunday. We'll pick it up from there.